Look, I meant what I just said, that I respect what you're doing, although I disagree with it far more than I respect people who are like, I'm voting for like Stein or Johnson or McMuffin.
Yeah.
That makes no sense.
No, I have the same logic you did, which is to say, look, there's a million choices out there. You can write in somebody's name, you can do whatever you want, but only one of two people are going to win. So it's either going to be President Trump or President Clinton in a few months. But you can posture or claim you're for anybody in the phone book. Now, if you're in a swing state, that question that you just posed becomes, I think, very consequential and really ought to guide your action. If you're in a state that's solidly R or solid D, then fine. You can vote for a third party, write in somebody, and make a statement. But I'm in Ohio, so I'm in a swing state, and I said my vote is going to matter. And I'm either going to vote for President Clinton or President Trump. And I said, President Trump, in my view, would be a disaster. We cannot abide this guy, and I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton.
Let's talk about some of the issues that you focused on in your time in the Reagan administration, and then, of course, in some of your work that you're doing now. You're the CEO of Export Now, which is a company, I guess, dedicated to getting consumer brands into China. We've seen China harass our tech companies, Google, even Facebook, after old Mark Zuckerberg goes over there and prostrates himself to the propaganda minister speaking Mandarin. Uber just gets they got kicked out of China. They said they left, but they couldn't compete there. Do you think in looking at our trade deficit, which has ballooned really over the last 15 years, how can you, with all of your experience in seeing this play out, how can you say that continuing the policies that we've had for the last 15, 20 years on trade is ultimately going to be the right choice for the American people?
Well, I believe in reducing trade barriers. I believe in promoting trade. And I would say that in general, movement to free trade agreements do work and do help the American economy, do help the American worker.
What WTO has been a net plus for the American economy with what China has done in the WTO? To our steel industry, to our rubber industry? Really?
Yeah, I think it's helped American economy, and I think it's helped China as well. But that's the nature of market economics, that both parties can win. Sure, U.S. economy has grown enormously since China entered the WTO, and what we've seen is the very labor-intensive low-end jobs that were moving offshore, disappearing in the United States. Anyways, it definitely accelerated that process. But the idea that your kids were going to grow up to make socks or T-shirts wasn't really a strong prospect in any event. Those jobs were disappearing in any event. But China entering the WTO accelerated that process.
Well, we've lost 6 million manufacturing jobs that have not come back to the United States. And people say, well, that's innovation. It's not all due to innovation. There's a percentage that's due to innovation, but not all are due to innovation. But the fact of the matter is our trade deficit has ballooned with China. Yeah. So you can kind of say, well, it's all worked out. Well, it hasn't worked out for communities like Rochester or in Rochester, New York, or Binghamton or Columbus, or parts of Kentucky in Pittsburgh that had to fight and spend hundreds of millions of dollars over decades fighting China's dumping of illegal steel in the United States and unfair trade practices, which now they have so much market power, they can just say, oh yeah, we'll fix that, and then they never do. And by the time we figure it out, our companies go under.
No, look, on particular dumping and countervailing duty activities, I'm extremely sympathetic to the criticism of China. I ran my last job in the George W. Bush administration as Commerce Undersecretary, Laura. I ran that anti-dumping countervailing duty program, and we sanctioned China more than any other administration. So we think did a pretty effective job in pushing back against those illegal activities. That's a very small part of overall trade, although you're right, in the communities it hits, it is acute, it is painful in those particular communities. But I was just making a general point about trade in general is beneficial to the U.S.
Trump
economy.
Said that, though, yesterday or the day before. Trump said, we can't be isolated. We're not an isolated nation. We should do trade. And so I would ask you, Frank, again, with all your experience, what would you do differently vis-a-vis our trading relationship with other countries, such as China, where we've maintained a massive trade deficit, meaning our exporters versus their exporters will lose an overwhelming percentage of the time? We just keep going the way we're going and hope something changes, or what do you think?
But the best response, if you think somebody's not playing fair and there are issues in a country like China, the best response ought to be let's reduce barriers with the countries that do play fair. Let's work with like-minded societies that do play by the rules. For example, the European Union, which is rule-based, law-based, mature industrial economies. So let's liberalize trade across the Atlantic and at least capture the benefits there. But we're not going to see.
So you want to do more of the stuff that we've already done, because we heard a lot of this about the WTO and NAFTA. I mean, we these exact arguments were made both by Bush officials, and I can play the sound bites, and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. We heard these same arguments made that once we pass NAFTA, this is going to happen, and once we do the WTO, China's not going to be a member. By the way, we were promised that. Of course, China became a member of the WTO. Then we see these massive deficits. We were promised the same thing with the Korean Free Trade Agreement. Every year since we signed the Korean Free Trade Agreement, we've lost jobs to Korea. Every single year.
Yeah, but I think no, wait a second. You're making two somewhat different points.
Right.
One is something like the Korea Free Trade Agreement helpful to America. I'd say it is very helpful to America. The second point you're making is, well, but there's a trade deficit. But I'd say those are two very different points. I would say trade liberalization isn't designed to give us a surplus. That's not the goal of trade liberalization. And if we have a trade deficit, it doesn't mean the other party is cheating or did something untoward. So if we have a trade deficit with Canada but a trade surplus with Britain right now today, it doesn't mean that we somehow are cheating Canada or Canada's cheating us. So it's not a good measure of the effectiveness of a trade agreement, because it's natural to assume that one party might sell than the other party. So somebody's always going to have a surplus. Somebody's always going to have a deficit.
Well, approaching balance is one thing. I mean, being $10 billion down, but being $220 billion down. I mean, a billion here, a billion there, but $220 billion buys a lot of military technology. It buys a lot of space technology. All I would say, Frank, and hold on a second, going back to Reagan, because you and I both worked in the Reagan administration, and I lived in the former Soviet Union. Ronald Reagan made a decision based on our strategic interests, based on our adversarial posture with the Soviet Union, that we would not trade with the Soviet Union. I lived there. I saw it. Right. I saw what it did to that society. We have an adversarial relationship, whether people want to realize it or not, with communist China. We see what they're doing in the South China Seas. We see what they're doing in buying up critical infrastructure and other companies. They just bought a big German technology company today. We see what they're doing, and yet we are enriching them year after year after year. You think, again, with everything our former boss did, that is the right posture for us to take?
Well, Reagan believed in engagement with China, and he did believe in economic sanctions.
What did he do with the Soviet Union, Frank? What did he do with the Soviet Union?
It was sanctions against the Soviets and engagement with China was Reagan's view.
But for what?
But no, you just said what Reagan did.
Right, I understand what he did with China. That was then, this is now. What did Reagan understand about the Soviet Union? That at some point this was going to be an existential threat to the United States of America, our position in our own hemisphere and our position around the world, correct? That's what he understood. That's what we all believed back then, correct?
Well, look, I would take your logic, but I just don't take your premise. If a country is a threat to us, like, say, North Korea, then yes, sanctions ought to be applied. But I just don't think I don't think we're in a Cold War era. I think China is an ascendant power.
Wow.
I think there's points of competition. There's points of friction. There's things we need to be sensitive to.
They're bulldozing churches in China. They're bulldozing churches. They're taking they still have 275,000 people from the last count from Amnesty International in re-education camps. They cut babies out of the wombs of women, and we're sitting here going, "Oh yeah, they're just an ascendant power." I don't get that. Maybe I'm just totally naive, but I just don't get that. Like, we were like, ain't going to play Sun City in South Africa because it's apartheid. But there is a different type of apartheid going on in China against Christians, against nonconformers, against people who speak their mind. And we have all these, quote, free traders who are just like, oh, yeah, they're just an ascendant power. I mean, and I love you. I think you're a great person. I think you're a great guy. But to me, that doesn't make any sense. I know you make money in China, but I don't make that. That makes no sense.
No, well, we make money by helping American firms compete in the market. So you can complain either that China's closed, which isn't really true, or you can complain that this is
closed to Uber.
China's closed, or now
it was closed to Google.
Lori, you're issuing. well, wait a second, you're issuing two complaints. This is terrible, China's closed. And I'm saying, well, it's not really closed. We're not completely closed. You say, well, that's terrible, too. It's terrible that you're selling into China. They can't both be terrible, right? It's got to be okay to sell products into China.
My point is that
wasn't your.
Now, my point is a simple one. What Trump stands for is smarter, better, more pragmatic trade agreements that take into account our strategic and our economic interests, both short term and long term. Yeah. That's what I mean. That's why. And I can't remember. Were you for?
But let me challenge you.
Yeah.
But let me challenge you on that, because if that's what he wanted, then he'd say, let's have a trade agreement with Japan. Japan is a modern industrial democracy, an ally of the United States, and a country we can work with very closely. Why wouldn't we want a trade agreement with Japan?
Well, we can do bilateral trade agreements with everybody. Well, why not?
No,
he's not against that.
Well, yes, he is. He's saying let's throw TPP in the trash can. That's
God. Well, TPP we could debate for an hour. You know what's in Chapter 10 of TPP? Well, right, you read that?
No. I heard your lead up. But here's the point. You can't say China's the enemy. We got to be tough on China, and then you say, by the way, Japan's also an enemy.
Yeah, Frank. I wish we had an hour. But so it's your position today that China will never become a member of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Is that your position?
My position right now is nobody wants it in right now. China doesn't want to be in it right now.
Yeah, you know why?
But look,
China's smart. They're going to see how it works out over the next couple of years.
No, but hold on. You made a very good intellectual sort of argument there that I find myself in agreement with, to say, look, U.S. government and the West has had this approach to China since Nixon's opening for 40-some years that said... And is America
stronger today than she was 15 years ago? On any measure, is America stronger today? We'll hold Frank over. If he can come back next hour if he wants, we can continue this conversation. I hate to cut him off. He's making some great points. We'll take a break. Don't go away.